Hello, welcome back to Nyambung, the channel that will make you click and connect on international relations and public policy matters. With me, Dina Praptoraharja, and my co-host, Nadila Amani. Hello Nadila, good to see you again.
Hello Budina, good to see you.
Let's discuss about Myanmar today, shall we?
Okay, we're going to talk about Myanmar today, and today is actually 11th June 2021 in Jakarta. It's raining quite a bit, actually. You might hear it in the podcast.
Yes.
And just like what Budina said, we're going to discuss about Myanmar. Okay, Budina, we knew that mass protests have been taking place across Myanmar since its military coup started on this year's 1st February. Also, since then, Myanmar's military has been taking violent action towards the pro-democracy protesters. According to Assistant Association for Political Prisoners, or AAPP, until 10th June of 2021, the military or the junta have killed more than 800 people and detained nearly 5,000. Please update me on what's been going on in Myanmar until today, Budina.
I have to say it's been very sad that the oppression against the civilians by the military junta continue to worsen. From my end, I don't see yet any sign of relief or stopping of the violence. It's been really sad that we don't have good updates on this. So as you mentioned, the death toll in Myanmar continue to rise. You mentioned 800, but according to the Burma Human Rights Network, their count is 927. And I bet the number of missing people also higher, as the civil society record. So mobile data, public Wi-Fi, broadband Wi-Fi, 2,600 megahertz Wi-Fi are still disconnected. This info is until June the 8th, probably up to date. May still be the case, which means that communication among civilians in general remains tough. We can also see that every day the protest from civilians continue, but yet the military junta does not alleviate any of the pressures. Their modus of operandi is to chase to villages. They identify activists and then abduct them. And whenever there are protesters, they'd be willing to open shootings towards the protesters. So I guess overall it has been a dire picture about Myanmar. This is actually getting worse, in my view, since the ASEAN leadership meeting back in April 24th, 2021, Nadila. Too bad.
Yeah, it's too bad. Also, I'm curious, Budina, in the coup, we heard a lot about the junta or the military group, but we are also heard a lot about NUG. Can you explain what is NUG to us, Budina, and who are they?
Okay, NUG is the National Unity Government. It is the Burmese government in exile, formed by a group of elected lawmakers who were supposed to be inaugurated just before the coup happened on the 1st of February 2021. So these unity government comprised of members of the parliament, lower house, from the committee representing Ki Daum Shu Lutau, that's what they call the lower house. So the prime minister is Man Win Kang Tan, the vice president is Dua Lashi, and the minister of foreign affairs is a lady Zin Mar Aung. So this NUG has been more active, I noticed, since the ASEAN leaders meeting in April to seek for international recognition. They've been sending out messages and also letters to the United Nations, ASEAN, also various other international organizations to make sure that the one getting recognized to represent Myanmar will be them, the National Unity Government, instead of the military junta. So NUG has been very active lately to try to balance the presence of the military in the society. They've announced the formation of People's Defense Force, which is an armed wing to launch armed revolution against the military junta. So they basically call on government officials and officers to join the People's Defense Force, and some of them get trainings from the military junta who get away from the group. So this is an interesting progress, if you can say so. Basically, these government employees got trained by ethnic arms groups, plus also some of the military personnel who chose to left Tatmadaw. News comes to me that it's about 800 military that now have left and joined with the people in this PDF, People Defense Force. So NUG has been trying to make the military junta discredited. They call the group as terrorist organization per May 8, 2021. One of the things about the NUG's activity is I see that they still have a big challenge to revoke the junta from Myanmar politics. In terms of diplomatic activities, NUG basically still cannot suppress the participation of Myanmar junta in various international forums, including the presence of the junta in ASEAN. So far, NUG has expected that the presence of China and Russia, their condemnation of the coup would help. But expecting other countries to do something as such may be a very tough thing to expect. China and Russia so far has been blocking efforts by the UN Security Council to condemn the coup and to maintain that this development in Myanmar is an international, not an international affairs. Instead, it's an internal affairs of Myanmar. So, NUG still has a homework, I think. Not many of us have heard the personnel of NUG speaks through various channels. I guess their outreach to the public remains very limited, and on the one hand I can sympathize. Probably that's because of the cuts of communication done by the Myanmar junta, but they need to work harder to make sure that their presence is much more felt by the world leaders and also by world public, so that people can actually see NUG as the one with legitimate authority from Myanmar.
Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting, actually, Budina, that you said that some of the civilians is being trained by the former Tatmadaw army, right, Budina? So you mean that Tatmadaw army is losing its personnel, like with time?
Support,
more and more personnel?
Some of the individuals inside of Myanmar is saying that the NUG is very tough in saying to all government officials that they are not supposed to show any support to Tatmadaw. But the interesting news is that the Tatmadaw itself is losing support. So some of the high-ranked military are now leaving the Tatmadaw and joining people, training youth to fight back against the military. One thing that I'm not yet sure is how things are working in the provinces, because if you notice, Myanmar is basically a country with many provinces. There are 14 provinces, of course, much less than Indonesia, but the relationship between provinces is far less united than Indonesia. So inside of every province, they would have their own security forces. They would also have their own defense forces, and each of them may not talk to each other. At least it was in the past, and they don't necessarily they don't coordinate whatsoever, and they are armed. So when something like this happen, I wonder myself whether the Tatmadaw that they say is experiencing attrition of power is only in certain areas, certain provinces, or is it more of generic trend across provinces? But the landscape of Myanmar is actually very, very challenging. Lots of mountains and what do you call that? Lots of mountains and forest. Lots of mountains and forest. Guerrilla movements, I heard, is also growing now in some areas, which means that at night there will be attacks, to the military, but who actually does this, which group, that's remains unknown.
Okay. And also, you mentioned that NUG, one of the NUG homework is to be recognized more and more with the world leaders. This is also interesting, Budina, because we heard lots of news about the leader of the junta actually is being invited to lots of meetings with the world leader instead of the NUG. What do you think about that, Budina?
Myanmar as a country has a long history of being highly divided among provinces. So when something like this happened, the coup, I mean, there's basically a very suitable environment for the military to remain in power. Why? Because it's the only group inside of Myanmar who has not only the weapons to control with chain of commands that's quite strong, whereas the groups inside of the provinces, they basically have problems collecting their forces, mobilizing resources, and deciding that their struggle is a common struggle. So NUG are basically politicians. They are comprised of politicians. I mean, they are not, back during the time of the leadership of the junta. That just before this coup happened. Basically, Myanmar has been ruled by the power of the military, who who has seats quite strongly in numbers in the parliament, and based on that seats and their winning in the elections, basically they rule with legitimacy, that they represent the majority of the voices of Myanmaris. So during that time, the politicians who now comprise of NUG basically just watch. Basically, they just they may have resentments, but they don't have control over the security situation, military weapons, and things like that. So the coup of February 1 is basically a disaster that one could have predicted in the past. It's just a time bomb that we know will happen in a country so fragmented, and where security issues and defense issue is very problematic inside of Myanmar. So it's only now that the civilians inside of NUG realize that they have to collect all their knowledge together to make a difference. They need to outreach somehow and make civilian supremacy over situation in Myanmar. And it could be quite challenging for some people who usually just let the issue of military, let the issue of defense and security to the military people. Now they have to deal with it. So this is something that I guess Myanmar would have to learn, that for a country like Indonesia, for instance. Myanmar is very much like Indonesia, but I don't know why Myanmar still think that learning from Indonesia is not an option. But actually lots and lots of what had happened in Myanmar, Indonesia have experienced in the past. Worse even, Indonesia has a much more difficult terrain. The landscape is much more challenging because we comprised of islands. But at that time, the solidarity among politicians, the civilian politicians, is relatively growing across times. We have some principles that unite the country together, which in the case of Myanmar is absent. It's not there. And then in Indonesia, there are, they remained quite connected in terms of military strength from different places. Even though there are armed groups, the focus has been to make sure that there are collectivity of concern among the civilians against at that time against the foreign forces. Now Myanmar has not quite seen the foreign forces that they want to combat, and at this stage even I can still see inside of the NUG there may be disagreements as well in terms of who to combat, who would be the friends of Myanmar and who would be the sort of enemy of Myanmar. They still have disagreements inside of NUG. So this needs to settle, I think, among the civilians and in the leadership position inside of NUG. Otherwise, the people would continue to get confused. Which direction is the country heading? And if even if the military needs to transform completely from Tatmadaw to something else, what kind of military force would they have? How would they relate with the ethnic armed forces? That's the third thing I would like also to mention. Inside of Myanmar, the feeling of ethnicity remains very strong. which means the sense of unity would be compromised under that situation. Ethnicity is something that is born with you, but at the same time, if you put so much emphasis into ethnicity, you forget to see the commonalities among people living in a certain area. Now this has to change, and unfortunately I haven't seen statements from NUG that creates this sense of unity among ethnic groups. Not yet, which I really hope soon the NUG leaders would fix this problem.
Okay, and because we're talking about the NUG, Budina, I want to ask, does the NUG have something to do about the civil disobedience movement? Because we knew that civil disobedience movement is also formed as in opposition to the coup. Just one day after the coup started, actually on 2nd February 2021, healthcare workers and civil servants across the Myanmar has been protesting on the behalf of a Facebook campaign group named the Civil Disobedience Movement. Can you also update us on the progress of the movement?
So the NUG and the Civil Disobedience Movement are two different things.
Yeah.
They are not necessarily linked in terms of organizing. The people are the people. They comprise of youth, local figures, and activists, basically, with awareness that they must join forces. They must voice their standing in a condition where nationally there has been widespread violence, but they are not necessarily supporting the standing of any particular individuals inside of NUG. So this is interesting, isn't it? Civil disobedience movement comprised of various groups, and I don't have enough information yet to share on whether these groups actually somehow already at the level of quite being connected to each other. But one thing I know is that every day different people in different districts and provinces, or they call it townships, they protest. Some of them also now start using unmanned protest. I asked them, what does it unmanned protest means? Because in some of the reports, this terminology comes up. Basically, they put out posters, pictures of disobedience that they posted on different strategic places in the township, and to show that the spirit of determination to go against the military junta is known to the junta. So the spread of this civil disobedience movement is quite broad now. If at the start of the coup, we know that most of the movement is concentrated in around Mandalay province, which is the central part of Myanmar. Now the movement spread to townships level in Kachin in the northeast, in Dawei Township in southwest area bordering the Indian Ocean, Kyunla Township north of Dawei, and further north in Shan Province, Kaya State, and more. People basically have no fear of being arrested. Some of these people are really determined. Even the youth, when they know they are potentially would get shot or abducted, they continue to express disobedience. So solidarity at the people-to-people level is actually quite impressive. There are reports that people are sharing and donating food and water to the neighbors. So it's been an interesting consistency from people, the civil disobedience movement. So this is what I'm saying earlier. At the local level, the spirit is big, the determination is big. The question is, how does the NUG take very good use of this passion from the people to unite them, instead of just thinking about the NUG. It's not just the recognition of the NUG, but how do you amass the support to represent all these voices as the united Myanmar? I think that's the biggest homework that the leadership inside of NUG has to achieve at this point.
Yeah, I agree. Now I can see why you said that the NUG needs to unite all the voices so that they could have balanced power to face the junta.
Yeah. The junta is very tactical, I should say. They are trying to do everything to deter people from voicing disobedience. I guess that's the key word for what they've been doing. So to the activists, what the Tatmadaw has been doing is they try to abduct and then charge all these people with crimes. Of course, one of the things that we learn about a situation like this is criminalization is one of the strategy aligning with torture, with inhumane and degrading treatments, which is unacceptable everywhere. So it's very clear in the Sun that basically what the Tatmadaw doing is beyond acceptable, and it's a gross violation of human rights. But it's surprising to me that the NUG has not expressed enough in terms of that all of these violations of or charges, failed the charges against the activist is just bogus. It's unacceptable. It should be made more clear to people that they are not violating any particular law. All these laws that they mention is being violated is just their way of deterring disobedience, deterring a peaceful solution to the conflicts inside of Myanmar.
Okay, yes, I agree. So now let's talk about ASEAN, Budina, because finally we're talking about ASEAN. Because on the 24th April 2021, the state member of ASEAN held a special leader summit in Jakarta, where the junta leader also attends the summit. In this agreement, 5 steps were agreed to bring the situation in Myanmar under control, including to end the violence and the appointment of an ASEAN envoy. But the last time I read the news, I heard that the students and the civilians of Myanmar is actually protesting about ASEAN and UN. They said that it's been too long. Now we're not going to wait on ASEAN and UN again. And can you update on the progress of this agreement, Budina? Because I'm actually curious too on the progress.
Okay, about ASEAN. The ASEAN leaders meeting organized on the 24th of April back in the ASEAN Secretariat basically produced a 5-point consensus. The first thing we have to remember about this consensus was that it was not produced by all leaders of ASEAN. We have to remember that the summit was only attended by 6 presidential / prime minister level leader. Let's just check out the countries who actually sent their leader. There's a prime minister of Vietnam, Pham Minh Chinh. And then from Malaysia, Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin. From Indonesia, President Joko Widodo. From Cambodia, Prime Minister Hun Sen. From Brunei Darussalam as the chair, Sultan Hassan Al Bolkiah. And then from Singapore, there was the Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. The rest of the countries sent their envoy, which are mostly are foreign ministers. They are Laos, Philippines, and Thailand sending their foreign ministers. And then Myanmar sent the Commander-in-Chief, Min Aung Hlaing, which I cannot say quite represent the leadership of Myanmar, given the conflict inside of the country. So what has been called five-point consensus is not a true consensus of leaders in ASEAN. That's my first note. Second, if you notice the 5 points, the points basically rest or hinge on the visit by special envoy that will be appointed by ASEAN to meet all the parties concerned inside of Myanmar. It doesn't mention who are the parties concerned. So at that point, when I read this 5-point consensus, to be honest, I was thinking only of the importance of having ASEAN on board this, seeking solution for Myanmar. Because after all that has happened, despite the weakness of ASEAN, if you can say so, ASEAN has a central role in the region. It's the organization that international organizations and foreign countries not in the region would always seek to have dialogue with. So having the ASEAN leaders participate in at least discussing the matters of Myanmar together is a good sign, and that should be appreciated. But when I look closer into the 5-point consensus, the thing that bothers me are the thing that I just mentioned. It was not attended by all. It was basically hinges on the appointment of special envoy. It doesn't say anything about who will be the parties met in Myanmar. It doesn't have any timeline. That was also shocking. Upon my first reaction of the 5-point consensus, I was thinking it will be well thought on the timeline. But after 1 week, I recheck again to the authority and see what are the timeline looking for the appointment of special envoy. Nothing. There was no timeline. So the appointment of the special envoy hinges really on the goodwill of the chair and the Secretary General, which coincidentally is Brunei Darussalam. The chair of ASEAN this year is Brunei, and the ASEAN Secretary General is Dato' Lim Jok Hoi from Brunei. So that's from ASEAN. They really come back to this 5-point consensus. Now, it's been very slow, to be honest, what ASEAN do. Too slow, if one can also say. The excitement, the momentum after the ASEAN leaders meeting doesn't materialize at all, which one could say contributes also to the confidence of the Tatmadaw to continue doing violence towards civilians. So the updates about ASEAN is that the Secretary General and the chair of ASEAN, represented by Second Foreign Minister Dato' Erwan Pehin Yusof, has just visited Naypyidaw, meet with Min Aw Hlaing, the Commander-in-Chief of Tatmadaw, back on the 4th of June. So imagine, it takes a long time between April until June to visit Myanmar. And I think it's unacceptable that until now nobody knows what was exactly discussed. And from what we know, nobody else but Min Aw Hlaing was visited at that time. And second of all, it's also sad to hear that the ASEAN has not come into agreement in terms of who will the special envoy be. The news said that Indonesia is actually interested to send a candidate, but Myanmar, as one can expect, because it's the Tatmadaw saying this, they would prefer to have Thailand as a special envoy. And I really feel bad that ASEAN doesn't say anything against it. That I don't know if this is the weakness of the chair, or the fact of the matter is there are also other countries pushing for this to accept having Thailand as the special envoy, which I think is a mistake. I'm sorry to say it, nothing against Thailand, but the situation is real. Thailand is also a military junta. What can you expect? It doesn't even attend the ASEAN leaders meeting, the leader. So the commitments that ASEAN display on this Myanmar is really weak. Therefore, is really out of place. It's far from what people expect ASEAN would do. So it's a very sad progress inside of ASEAN. Oh, another thing, they only meet as well with Tan Swe, the chairman of the new election commission, which again is the approved figure from Tatmadaw. So you know, what is wrong with ASEAN? I start seeing ASEAN as a group of foreign ministers who simply try to walk by procedures only. They have no feel, no soul of going back to what ASEAN Charter mandates them to do, or the fact that ASEAN is people-centered, people-oriented. It's about the people. It's not about how a certain leader is comfortable with something. It has to be a breakthrough. This is not what we are seeing in ASEAN. It's been very disappointing.
Yeah, I agree. The situation has been really frustrating, right, Budina? It seems like really frustrating. And it seems like the consensus is not really impacting the junta, right, Budina? What do you think what will happen? Like, can ASEAN do something else about this? Can ASEAN meddle in this coup?
I think the suitable way of saying it is not meddling in. It's already at the stage where ASEAN need to be in charge. The reality is, as we have discussed earlier, inside of Myanmar, there are too many fragments of power and desire. Not all of them are uniting behind the NUG, but there is a strong determination that people no longer want to be under military junta, that what the military junta doing is unacceptable. That's clear, right? And if there's no clear representation of leadership inside of Myanmar, the only one that should take the chance take the opportunity, take the momentum to be there for the people is ASEAN, in my view. It's a collectivity after all. It's not an intervention in the sense of one country trying to take over other countries, right? It's a genuine expression of desire to help the people, create certain kind of certain situation of stability that would allow people to talk with each other and bring solution. And this, even NUG is not capable of doing at this point. So something needs to be there to take that role. But none of the bureaucrats inside of ASEAN is willing to do so. I have my own regret, to what Indonesia has been doing so far. I think Indonesia can be more strong and present at this point, instead of being just procedural and always wait for the chair to get into his senses. Into their senses. It takes a long time, between April until June, and
6 weeks.
Yeah, 8 weeks, and
no progress for 6 weeks.
Yes, and what you hear is just, oh, we tried, we call, we pressure, we question Brunei. Don't you know that Brunei will never make any swift decisions? That because the consensus was only attended by 6 leaders, this 6th leader needs to be the one who makes swift decision for Myanmar, regardless of what the rest is saying, regardless of who didn't attend the meeting. They should not slow down the decisions made by ASEAN. Just the fact that they didn't attend means that they are not interested to make ASEAN matter in this instance. When would they realize it? When would they realize that let's not wait for these countries who did not attend the ASEAN leaders meeting define how ASEAN make decisions for Myanmar? How can can they be more confident that what they're doing is right and is needed by Myanmar? That's the part that I still have to get my senses around. I really think that ASEAN should be foreign ministers could be more in charge. The 6 ones who was backed by the prime ministers and presidents, they should have more confidence and make decisions. It's an unusual situation. It's a very foolish thing to say for ASEAN to matter. They have to get consensus from 10. This is unusual situation. How can you wait for 10?
Yeah, oh my god, I agree. We feel what the civilians of Myanmar when they said they won't wait for ASEAN and UN, right, Budina? It's because it's even frustrating for us.
That thing about UN. You hear as well the news that inside of the UN Security Council there was actually a move to embargo weapons for Myanmar, so that the Tatmadaw is not going to be able to use any weapons coming to Myanmar for violence against civilians. What's interesting is that, well, not interesting in a good sense this time, ASEAN member states cannot get their heads around it, and instead of these countries who agree to embargo the weapons making decisions apart from their fellow ASEAN countries, they wait for the countries who disagree to embargo the weapons. And if you can trace for yourself, I encourage the listeners here to find for themselves which country from ASEAN decided not to support the embargo, and that slow down the decisions inside of inside of the UN, because some of the countries who actually agree for the embargo decided to let this sound bothers the UN. They could have just say ignore them. They didn't, they didn't matter. They must have miscalculation or something about the situation, and go on. So I start seeing that ASEAN is really one of the problems now. If nothing happened to change the situation inside of ASEAN, that they still say that they need to be 10 of them to make a decision, I think it's really time to just transform ASEAN completely and replace them with something else.
Yeah, it's really frustrating, Budina. I agree with you. And also, maybe we're gonna move on to the next topic.
Okay.
As Indonesian, it seems like we cannot talk about Myanmar without also talking about Rohingya, Budina. Among the reason, because our country have rescued and took hundreds of Rohingya refugees throughout the years. The refugees mostly placed in Sumatra Island, and as of last week, actually, as many as 90 Rohingyas landed in Indonesia. They arrived from Cox's Bazar, Bangladesh, mostly consisted of women and children. Also, what's interesting is that on June 3rd, Myanmar's NUG released paper on the country's Rohingya community, Budina. Even though the language is somewhat non-specific, could this be the sparking light indicating the end of the tunnel regarding Rohingya's matter to the Myanmar, Budina?
All right, about Rohingya. It's very important, I think very critical for us to talk about Rohingya, because the Rohingyas are supported by groups located in different places. Some of them are still inside of Myanmar, some of them are already in exile. From what I observe, the Rohingyas are divided. Different groups, they have different capacity of mobilizing, support for the Rohingyas. One of it is because each of their leader have different capacity, and some leaders are more strong, getting strong constituent support than others as well. And interestingly, because there are groups of Rohingya, not all of them are already meeting with NUG yet. So one of the stronger groups is Arakan Rohingya National Organizations, or ARNO. Not only because they have influential organizations, they're also armed, and they also participate in election as registered political parties. In answering how the NUG respond to the Rohingya issue, I would like to cite their statement. I think it's important for the listener to hear the policy position of the National Unity Government on the Rohingya. Okay. They call the policy statement as policy position on the Rohingya in Rakhine State. Very particular. I think it's very particular. It's not about Rohingya people, it's about Rohingya in Rakhine State. Okay, that's the first note just on the title. And then it started off with some statements about in honor of human rights and human dignity, and also to eradicate conflicts and root causes in the Union. The National Unity Government aims to build a prosperous and federal democratic union where all ethnic groups belonging to the union can live together peacefully. Next, it says everyone in the union has full enjoyment and fundamental human rights. All ethnic groups who are native to the union have full enjoyment of individual rights held by individual people. All citizens who swear allegiance to the Union, regardless of their ethnic origins, are considered to have full enjoyment of citizens' rights. So, they're already mentioning two precondition for people to enjoy fundamental human rights. Only ethnic groups who are native to the Union, and only those who swear allegiance to the Union. As someone in political science, I read this kind of statement as a warning. As a warning. It doesn't actually see people as people, but they see they put some condition before the state, or at this point the national unity government, would like to treat them. Next, in their statement, they also mention about the constitution. So their framework for recognizing Rohingya is still using the same framework as the military junta. Why I say so? Let me repeat this part of the statement where it says, after consultations with the many different stakeholders in Rakhine State, including Rohingya groups and refugee representatives from the IDP camps, the NUG here makes clear how it will seek to apply these principles for the good of all in the Rakhine State. The NUG understands the violence and gross human rights violation inflicting upon Rohingyas, sympathetic to the plight of Rohingya, and seek to bring the perpetrators to account, if not only for the realization of justice, but also as a deterrent against future atrocities. We consider the 88 recommendations set out in the final report of the Advisory Commission of Rakhine State, commissioned by or chaired by Dr. Kofi Annan, must play a crucial role in addressing the affairs in Rakhine State. But we would like to highlight the importance of legal matters in seeing to the Rakhine question. We will consider the opinions and views of the entire people in the country, including those in Rakhine State, in drafting new constitution that can resolve many problems caused by the 2008 Constitution. The view and insights of all can contribute to this process. The process of repealing, amending, and promulgating law, including the 1982 Citizenship Law, will be beneficial in resolving the conflict. We commit to abolish the process of national verification cards. We affirm the agreements by the neighboring countries for repatriation process, and then basically we invite Rohingyas to join hands with us and with others to participate in the spring of revolution. Now notice that when the legal framework that they want to use is to replace what the 1982 law is currently still exists in Myanmar. So it doesn't want to just revoke, but replace with something else. And the something else will be based on how the other members of citizens look into the issue. I don't know what the word, all these complicated words they're using would mean, but I would imagine something like either a referendum of some sort, or a survey of some sort of how the rest of ethnic groups will accept Rohingya, which I think, again, back to the viewpoints or the way of thinking as ethnicities, which has been very destructive for Myanmar. Can the NUG realize this? That if they continue the mindset of Tatmadaw in their administration, they would be doomed to repeat the same problem in the future. They would be another set of junta in the future. Why? Because they continue to hide behind the procedure of making other people, sort of voice concerns, and when there's one group disagree about the presence of the other group, then there's no rights for that group to exist. But the fact of the matter is, these individuals, these people, the Rohingyas, they've been there for centuries. Just forget about whether they are native or not native. We all know it's a politicized issue. We all know that the Rohingyas are receiving unfair treatments and statements and all. And don't forget as well, inside of Myanmar, 2/3 of the population is Bamar. And the Bamar has for years exposed to the idea that Rohingyas people are non-productive, are violent, are having negative traits that make them don't deserve to be called Myanmar people. So how can you end this division? Can you end this violations against human being? It's humankind. They are not part of Bangladesh, as they keep saying. These Rohingyas are Bangladeshi people. They are not. They have lived for years inside of Myanmar. Can they realize it? So, Nadila, I think it's still a very long and dragging concern, about Myanmar at this point. To me, so long as the issue of Rohingya is still mistreated by the leadership inside of Myanmar, by the Tatmadaw and by the NUG, same dragging time bomb would live inside of Myanmar. It's just waiting to happen. They need to change the mindset, regardless of what happened in ASEAN, what happened in the UN, as some of these activists are saying. They condemn. Yeah, sure, you can condemn these organizations, but first and foremost, it's something needs to be changed inside of Myanmar in order to make all this assistance, all this help coming from external parties have positive impact for Myanmaris.
Yeah, it seems like if the pro-democrats wants to move again, like there needs to be like a radical solution, right, Budina? Because the problem is so rooted and systematic, it seems like. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I guess one on other note, because of this dragging violence inside of Myanmar, and that different groups are now trying to arm themselves just to defend their security for their houses and their village. The unforeseen problem that we may see is that some countries, external countries from outside of Myanmar, will try to will try to develop special linkage with certain province and township and leader, which is a bad sign, because this would worsen fragmentation inside of Myanmar and really splits Myanmar apart into little groups of armed personnel, armed civilians, and then who knows where the weapons come from, and they would work for whatever issue. So more and more Myanmar looks like a failed state already. And as I guess have discussed many months ago. This is one of the very strong reasons why the neighboring countries should make swift action. They can never contain violence of that sort only within the border of Myanmar. It will spill. There's no way that people would stay inside of the border under such circumstance. The problem would spill over to the neighboring countries. And I still try to encourage the neighboring countries through ASEAN to make a difference. Maybe this is one of the toughest time for ASEAN member states to, for one moment, forget about procedures, forget about advancing their bureaucratic goals and programs, and start thinking outside the box. If we don't move fast, Myanmar will definitely fall apart, and all the problems inside of Myanmar will go out and get into our part of the yard. So it's not something that would be happy seeing.
Yeah, I agree with you, Budina, and I think we need to talk more in depth about this matter in the next episodes. Of course.
We'll see what happened. Hopefully, there are more good news, in the next episode about Myanmar. Thanks for sparing time to discuss with me on this.
Oh yeah, thank you to you, Budina, because now we know more about this matter. And of course, if our listener, you who listen to this podcast, if you wanna ask more about this matter or any topic, you can ask in our YouTube channel maybe, because our podcast is also streamed in YouTube. You can comment or you can ask anything, and then maybe we can discuss about it, right, Budina?
Yes, please ask questions. If there are any, if there's any particular angle you would like me to discuss more, please post your questions so we can include it in the next talk.
Okay, maybe that's the end of our podcast today. The discussion is so enlightening, Budina, as always. Thank you once again for your time, and we should see what we're going to talk about next week.
Yes. Well, one of the things that we also try to do is make another channel in Bahasa Indonesia, but specific for social protection issues. So issues like healthcare and employment issues. So for those listeners from Indonesia, you can also hear some more different aspects of public policy in the next episode of Nyambung. On foreign policy, give us idea on what should be discussed. Let me know what should be discussed.
Yes, it's something that you guys can look forward to. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Budina,
Thank
for your time again. Bye bye.
Bye bye all.